Welcome back to the Warrior Servant Leader podcast, where we talk about real leadership with real people who have real stories and solutions and absolutely no excuses. Today, we have an incredible guest. He has a fascinating story. He's an award-winning author, internationally renowned speaker, personal transformation coach with over 30 years of experience. He has delivered powerful, life-changing messages at universities, at conferences, multinational corporations, spiritual communities, and it's been on the TEDx stage. He went from being a shy, introverted individual filled with self-doubt to now a trusted voice in personal growth and spirituality. His latest book, Conscious Love, Transforming Our Relationship to Relationships Conscious Love, invites readers to reimagine a love as a path of personal and spiritual growth, not simply a destination. And it unpacks the unconscious patterns that keep us stuck in unhealthy dynamics and reveals the keys to fostering relationships that are truly authentic, empowered, and deeply fulfilling. His previous bestseller, Awakening the Soul of Power, which, by the way, was praised by Gloria Estefan, garnered multiple prestigious awards, and Christian empowers individuals through his books and his speaking to unlock their potential, creating lasting positive changes in their lives and their communities. So a warm welcome to Christian de la Huerta. And we are so happy to have you here and are looking forward to just a great conversation.
Thank you, Pat. I'm really happy to be here with and have been looking through that conversation myself.
And being kind of a fellow Coloradan, even though we're both immigrants, you came from Cuba when you were 10. I came from Ireland when I was about a year and a half old. And somehow or other, we both landed in Colorado these many years later. I kind of want to start off because in looking at your books and in researching your speaking and your messaging, you write that you are an unlikely person to be talking about heroism. So let's jump into that. Kind of give us a little bit about your story and your journey and where it's brought you to today.
Yeah, and I was lived in Cuba. I was born in Cuba. Lived there the first 10 years of my life. So came as an immigrant to the U.S. when I was 10. And have lived in South Florida, where some of my family still is, many years in Northern California, and now, like you, in the mountains in the Rockies. And yeah, I am a very unlikely person to be speaking about topics like empowerment and heroism, because I know what it's like not to feel empowered and to feel like the opposite of heroism. And I was painfully shy as a teenager. I was okay one-on-one for the most part, but if you added a third person, I clammed up. And yet I always had a sense of mission. I always knew that I had work to do in terms of making a difference in real human lives and helping our collective process of evolution. And so I knew that I had to get out of that. I knew that it wouldn't be okay, that if I was going to fulfill my purpose, my mission, that I would have to get over that. So I did. I took a class in public speaking, which I hated. Detested it, because for 14 weeks I'd have to get up and speak, give like 3 2-minute speeches. But what happened? Like halfway, 3/4 through the course, it stopped being such a big deal. So that I know that if that can happen to me, and that kind of stuff, that kind of trauma can be healed in me and transformed in me, it can happen in anybody.
And how much of that was a language barrier in your earlier years? And did learning English as a second language, did that have any impact on kind of rewiring your sense of being an introvert, or it had nothing to do with it and there's more to the story?
Well, I think it certainly didn't help. You know, like coming when we came to the US, we lived in a small town in central Georgia, and there was nobody who spoke Spanish in my class. It was like sink or swim kind of thing. I had to learn the language quickly. Um, but you're right. You know, like sometimes I feel like I was that part of my my role this lifetime is to learn and to master what it means like to be different, to be other. You know, because when we lived in Cuba, my parents had already applied for a visa to leave to emigrate. So you know, the teachers who thought that anybody who was abandoning the revolution was a traitor. They used to call us gusanos, which means worm. And you know, and in retrospect, to call a little, you know, like a first grade or a second grade a worm is like, man, that's kind of twisted. And then when we came to the States, and then we lived in Georgia, as I said, and I stuck out because I didn't speak English. Then by the time we left Georgia, I moved to South Florida. Um, then I sounded different all over again because I had a sounded like a Georgia peach in in a city that was for the most part Latino. Um, and my class was definitely 80% Spanish speaking or, you know, bilingual. So yeah, I've always felt different, which has its challenges for sure, but it also has its advantages, because being different, kind of gives you a sense of perspective. So you're able to see the forest and the trees, gives you a sense of distance because you don't feel like you belong with the group.
Mm.
Um, so it's kind of an interesting mixed blessing.
What you just said just reminded me recently, last year, uh, he's now Saint Carlo Acutis in the Roman Catholic faith, and born in 1999
Mm,
and died in 2006. So he was 15-ish years old. Uh, Born in France, raised in Milan, and one of his famous quotes uh, is this, and he doesn't he never used the word different or he used a very positive. uh, But here's his quote: we're all born unique, but sadly, many of us die a photocopy of somebody or something else." And so he embraced his uniqueness and his deep love for technology and the internet. And he's actually considered now in the Catholic Church one of the patron saints of the internet. And
huh,
but his interest in it wasn't solely gaming. I mean, he enjoyed that aspect, but he used the internet to research all the miracles that he could find that were related to the Eucharist within the Catholic Mass,
hmm.
and then put together this whole documentary. It's on display. It goes around the world. I've seen it here in the United States, and uh, and just he embraced his uniqueness, but also somewhat of an introvert. And his grandmother was very, very ill, and he realized that he was not feeling well, but he didn't want to complain and say anything because he was more focused on his grandmother and supporting her and her journey and whatnot. When it turns out he actually had leukemia, so it went undiagnosed, and then when it was finally discovered, it was too late for treatments to have any impact. But what you're talking about, it just reminds me of that uniqueness, and that difference is actually, if you look at it not as a negative but as a positive, that you are a unique individual. How much did your transformation from being that shy, introverted, hated public speaking, um, that transformation to being on the international stage, so to speak, in multinational corporations, how much of that was yeah, I can't talk today, rewiring your mind, and how much of it would you attribute, if any, to your personal spiritual growth of recognizing what your purpose, why God created you in the first place?
I think, I mean, that's definitely the driver, Pat. That's what allowed me to do the stuff that I didn't wanna do. It was that sense of mission, that sense of knowing that I had work to do. Otherwise, if I didn't have that, I don't think I think I would be on the couch, channel surfing. Um, so it's interesting because when I'm paraphrasing Einstein, you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness in which it was created. And that's one of my favorite quotes, because what that means to me is that we can't continue throwing the same old answers to the same old problems. That we've got to shift the way that we see ourselves and the way we see each other, the way we see the planet, if we're going to dig ourselves out of this hole that we have collectively dug ourselves into. So that's what I think drives my work and gets me out of bed in the morning. And it's whether I'm doing a podcast or finishing a book or leading a weekend retreat. It's what inspires me is that. And um, yeah, I believe that, I know that the the myth of the 100th monkey turned out to be a myth. The story wasn't quite like that, but I still do believe in critical mass. So even though, my work, sometimes it feels like I'm just touching one person at a time, what keeps me going is trusting that at some point, when enough of us open our eyes and remember who we really are and what we're here for, that then will be a big shift in our collective consciousness.
Yeah. And it's like the 100 sheep, instead of the 100 monkeys that, from a scriptural standpoint, the good shepherd left the 99 to find the lost and
Yeah.
bring that lost sheep back into the fold. Well, not only did he change the life of that lost sheep, he has now messaged to the rest of the flock what makes him him, and that if they get lost, then he'll come looking for them. So that collective, what's the old African, proverb? It takes a village to raise a child. Is
Mhm.
is so true, and we've gotten so isolated. I think I don't know if you read if you've ever read the book by Ryan Holiday, "Ego is the Enemy." That we have gotten so consumed about being self-centered and what's in it for me that we are successfully destroying the collective good of humanity by becoming so self-centered, which kind of leads me to another question that I know you address a lot in why do we find ourselves in these patterns of destructive relationships and behavior, and we get what's the definition of insanity? Keep doing the same thing the same way and expecting a different result. What is it that drives, or I guess drives us to be in that repetitive pattern?
I think it's lack of awareness, Pat. We just don't know any better. And we've been so conditioned, whether it's our relationship to power or whether it's our relationship to love. We have such a limited view on that. And yes, sometimes it feels like we're in the same boring movie, only with a different co-lead. Like we keep repeating the same patterns in relationships, same old drama, same old arguments. But at some point, if we want to change that, we've got to get clear that there is one common denominator in every one of those arguments and in every one of those relationships. And this is not about making ourselves wrong or shaming ourselves. It's just about owning responsibility, because that's the first step. Otherwise, if we don't have that awareness, we keep repeating the same old patterns without even knowing what we're doing. Um, I have a friend who says that it's really important to heal a relationship with our parents so we can stop dating them. Um, yeah. So,
Yeah.
and it all begins with awareness, right? We have to see, and start simply. What do we like? What don't we like? What triggers us? What are the patterns? Um, because we're all different, right? So the same thing that's going to bother me, it's not the same thing that's going to bother you. So why does it bother me? What's that about? And so when we're willing to do the work, which takes work, it takes effort, um, but it's so infinitely worthwhile, because once we see those patterns, then we can make a choice and we can clear our pasts, and rather than bringing all of our unhealed, traumatized past into our current relationships, which is what we which is what we do, and we keep
Yeah.
repeating the same old crap.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of reminds me of the analogy of the lazy river ride at amusement parks. You know, you get in the floaty thing or whatever it is, the raft, whatever, the tube, and you just let the current take you to where it's going to take you, and they all end up at the same place where you started. You know, yeah, yeah. Maybe you got to see some scenic things, or you think you got to relax, but the ride ends. You get off, and you're at the same starting point as that's your ending point. And I use that analogy that that so often we. It's not that we don't have the skill sets. I don't think to intentionally do that introspection is we don't have. I hate to use this word because we don't. I'm going to use two words. We don't have the motivation or the discipline to do it because we've bought the lie that life is what it is,
Yeah.
and that. And so, how do you? I mean, what are some actual tools that somebody could use based on your experiences and your training and and just your life journey? What are some tools that got you to that point where you could break that cycle, see that, do that personal introspection, and then actually break the cycle?
Yeah, I love that question, and I'll answer in a minute, but I wanna, like, highlight what you just said, just jump off what we just said, because that is what makes it heroic work, what we're talking about. And to go through life and, just being taking along, just being flowing with the where the stream is taking us, anybody can do that. And it's not very exciting. But to grab life by the horns, to do the hard work of going within, figuring out who we are, what we want from this very short life, how we want to impact the world around us. How do we want to maximize that unique human potential that's inside each one of us? That's the stuff of heroes, right? To be willing to question, to go inside and question, um, who we are and why we do the things we do. That is nothing short of heroic.
And particularly for introverts, well, not even
Exactly.
introverts, but introverts because of the dynamics of what all that means. And then the flip side is the extrovert who has bought the lie or that's the worst advice I ever got is if you want it done right, do it yourself.
Right, right.
How does someone they hear your message and they're going, yep, I know exactly what Christian's saying. I want exactly what Christian is saying. I don't know how to do it by myself. So what's your insights and advice on that?
Well, I mean, the first step is going within, like, and that is a heroic step. It's like going within and asking those hard questions. Um, that's where all the answers are, and answers that nobody else can give us. Um, so I don't see a way around that. I'm not dogmatic about many things, maybe only two or three. But that's one of them. If you want to be free, if you've got to be willing to face yourself and ask the hard questions and face your inner fears and your inner demons. There's no way around that. And again, yes, it's heroic work, and it is so worthwhile because the reward for doing that work is freedom. And going through life referencing internally, what we do and why we do it, rather than depending on external sources. So it's infinitely worthwhile. And another reward of it is inner peace and self-acceptance, um, which self-acceptance is only possible through self-awareness and being willing to ask those questions and go within and observing ourselves in different situations. And yes, there's challenges to being introverted, but I think overall there's an advantage to that because I grew up being very thoughtful, and thinking, the hard questions, which made it difficult, and made me feel different and unique. But at the same time, in a way, I got an advantage or a head start because I'd been asking those hard questions early on. Um, and I think these are questions that we all have to face at some point, unless the other alternative is going through life self-medicating, right? Whether we do that with food or alcohol or drugs or workaholism or whatever it is, which is not a good strategy because we try to sweep that difficult stuff into the surface, and it doesn't go away when we sweep it under the rug. Just festers um,
Yeah.
under the surface. Point we gotta face it at some point.
So
Or
go
thing
ahead.
that happens if we go through life suppressing our emotions is those what used to be spiritual teaching that everything is energy. Now we know from quantum physics, even what feels solid, like this chair that I'm sitting on, it's all vibration. Our body's vibration, and we know from physics energy cannot be destroyed. So all the countless times that we swallowed our emotions, that we didn't try to run away from them, that stuff doesn't go away. It sticks in the body, and it gets trapped in the tissues and the organs. And um, if we don't pay attention to that and find a way of clearing and healing that, um, it it starts turning into physical symptoms: cancer, heart attacks, ulcers. And to answer your previous question, Pat, the main tool that I have found that has really sped up my process of healing and remembering who we really are is breath work. And I come out of the psychotherapy tradition. My dad was a psychiatrist. My degrees is in psychology, and I was on the track to get a PhD. And somewhere in that track, I discovered breath work, and after one session, I jumped tracks. I never went for the PhD because it works so fast and heals so profoundly. I've been doing it all over the world for the last, 30 something years. Um, and I've yet to come across anything that heals as quickly. Um, and as profoundly, and that gives us a sense of perspective. Because you mentioned the word ego earlier, which is a really critical concept to understand. Because most of us who know the word will think arrogance, inflated sense of self, and it is that for sure, but it is so much more than that. And the word ego means I in Latin. So the ego is the sense of self, of personality. Like this is Christian over here, that's Pat over there. It's both an illusion, and a helpful illusion, and it's also the source of all our suffering. And we don't really have the time to get deeply
Yeah.
into what ego is. There's so much to say about that. In the Power book, I probably spend the first quarter, fifth of the book talking about the ego and how to understand it. But here's a beautiful little image. If you put a baseball in the center of a stadium, that's what the ego is. Who we are is actually the stadium. And we've allowed this tiny, tiny, tiny part of who we are to think that it is all of who we are, and to make really important, consequential choices about our lives, about our relationships, from its very small, limited, and always fear-based perspective.
Hmm.
Mhm.
I'm going to write now. This happens in every episode. Is I become the Irish setter that sees a squirrel go running across because oh man, I had a question I was going to ask you, and then you just shared your analogy about the baseball ad. Here, so I follow. He was an incredible counter intelligence officer within the FBI Greek, and in the way he put it for me was the ego is you have to set it aside because it's not about you, it's about them. And he's talking about developing people to be spies against maybe against against our own country because it was counterintelligence. And he goes, it's not about you. It's always about them. That was rule one. Rule two was park your judgmental attitude at the door because that's driven by your ego. So don't
Totally.
be judgmental. You can disagree with somebody, but you don't have to tell them, that they're stupid or a worm. That's judgmental language. That was two. Three is validate the person that their reality is their reality. Don't try to convince them otherwise, kind of deal. So validate, and doesn't mean you have to agree with them. And I learned to use the word I appreciate what you're saying. Doesn't mean I agree with you, but I
Yeah.
validate your perspective. And then the other things, they were two. He goes, be reasonable and be generous.
Yeah.
And those are the core foundations of developing in the counterintelligence arena. But that's all about building relationships. But your analogy to baseball, because I'm thinking Robin Dreek as you're telling the story, and I go, oh yeah, the baseball is sitting on the mound in the stadium, and it's not about you. Yes, you got to throw it. The pitcher, batter's got to hit it. People got to catch it. But it's not about the baseball. It's about everybody else in the stadium. That
Yeah.
the roller coaster. You rob the home run going over the wall or whatever, and the fans go crazy. It's about them, not about you.
Yeah. Which
How do we break how do we intend it's kind of like I think it was Paul in scripture said it. I do the things that I know I shouldn't do, and I don't do the things I know I should do. And it's like, okay, you recognize it. How do you actually break it? Because I know you said, here's the question I was going to ask you. I think it's much easier for people to go, okay, yeah, I'll sit quietly and I'll reflect and I'll have a pen and paper and I'll write down, do that in introspection. So I write, I have that self-talk and I write stuff down. And then the hard part is, crap, I don't like the answer. So how do we rewire our minds and spiritually rewire to accept the answer that is the truth? That's the only thing that's going to set you free, kind of thing. How do we do that?
Well, it reminds me of the title of your podcast, right? It's finding that balance between the warrior and the servant leader. And because to me that it talks that relates to how we relate to power, right? It's about our relationship to power. The warrior is standing in his power. But as with balanced by the servant leader, or the servant king, as often was talked
Mhm.
or written about too, that power is no longer driven by a need to dominate, to control, to prove anything, but it's balanced by this desire to serve, to protect, to uplift, to make a difference. Um, and like, how do we change? Right? That's what we're really talking about.
Yeah,
The desire for something has to be greater than the resistance that will inevitably come up to anything, even if it's a good turn of events. Part of the function of the ego is to maintain the status quo. And even if the status quo is at best comfortable, at worst miserable, that the ego doesn't care about that, right? Its job is to maintain things exactly the way they are. So that means that anything that signifies change to it, it's going to be scary. It's going to be threatened by it. So for us to change and to step into the things that we want to bring more of in our lives, we have to get really clear about what's underneath the surface. So let's use a superficial example. So we want a red Corvette. It's not really about the red Corvette. It's like, what is the red Corvette gonna do for us? Right?
yeah,
What is it gonna make it possible? Why do we want that red Corvette?
yeah,
And so in tapping into those deeper underlying motivators, that's what allows us for that desire for whatever the outcome is to be able to overcome and the resistance that will inevitably come up to it.
You've used the analogy in the past in your writings and in your speaking about becoming the eye of the storm. And so as this conversation is going, that came to mind is how do we become the eye of the storm? Because it's, I don't know, I'm not a hurricane chaser, but as I understand it, it's in the eye of the storm, it's calm. It's not the destructive shit flying all over the place kind of stuff. So take that analogy that you've talked and written about, and I don't know, maybe give an example in your personal life of how you were in that storm. How did you transform yourself into being the eye of the storm instead of the destructive part of it?
Well, so many examples come to mind, I think, because we can all relate to that. And to me, what that visual gives us is like, yes, we can allow all the drama that surrounds us in life. And that would include other people's judgments, their expectations, because the ego, which we all have one, it's very judgmental and it has something to say about everyone and everything every single moment of the day. So standing as the eye of the storm to me means that we stand free. We stand in our power. We allow all the drama, all the circumstances of life, whether it's political, socioeconomic, environmental, what other people think, what they think we should be doing, how we should be wearing our hair and what should be wearing to work and all that kind of stuff. And we allow all that stuff to circle around us and we maintain our center. We maintain our sense of peace, our sense of who we are. And that is internally referenced, like we were talking about. And of course, that doesn't mean that we go through life arrogantly and not taking feedback or not considering what other people see in us, because we all have blind spots. So it's important to have that humility of the servant leader, to hear feedback, to receive it, to incorporate it, to integrate it, and not take it personally, so that it requires defending against. And all that comes from having that strong sense of self, which again is only possible by doing the heroic work of knowing ourselves.
Yeah, man, this is so good because I'm just, it's spinning in my spinning head. That if you keep that analogy of the eye of the storm, the guys in the plane have to have that heroic mindset to fly into the eye to begin with. And that's going to be a bumpy ride to even get into the eye. And they analyze it. They're collecting data. They're coming up with projections. And then they actually leave it. And so you're sharing, I'm thinking, okay, I get this. I can be in the middle of a hurricane of life and I can keep that calmness and I can be situationally aware, analyze, think of appropriate courses of action. And one of them may be, particularly, let's talk about toxic relationships or toxic work environment. It may be like the pilot in the Hurricane Hunter is we're out. We have to walk away. That we can't stop that storm, but we can get out of it and we can warn others about it. And that would be a form of what you call like heroism, or I call it the warrior mindset. You stand up, show up, and defend what you believe, and you do the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons. And the outcomes are going to be the outcomes. But you had that foundation, that moral compass that says that I'm going to always do or strive to do the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons, even if it costs me, there's consequences that I'm not going to like. We did an episode once and I was talking actually to a friend of mine and from law enforcement and what he went through, uh, and it came down to, and this was one of the last things he was talking about. It became the name of the episode. Sometimes you have to let Judas walk away. You can't. Christ let Judas walk. He could have stopped him, but it was his choices, and he knew the outcome and consequences for himself and for Judas. But sometimes that is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying in that becoming the eye of the storm, and the analogy, and that self analysis and all that kind of stuff. You can pick if you could picture that hurricane in the eye of the storm. What you're saying makes a boatload of sense.
Totally.
Um, so,
Totally.
um, let's, one more question, because I want to get into the human relationship arena, because that's where our whole lives are about human relations. Uh, how do you? Uh, I think you use the word soulful power,
Mhm.
but what is that, and how do you incorporate that into difficult relationships, or relationships that started out really well that are now faltering?
Yeah, well, I think all relationships are difficult and take work. Um, and so, yeah, and we have a very ambivalent relationship to power, as we do to the word love, right? We haven't been really taught what it really means. So, a lot of us have this desire to have power, but at the same time, we're afraid of it. And no wonder. How many times have we witnessed abuses of power, whether in our own personal lives or out in the world, like
Hmm.
any given day? All you have to do is turn on the news or read the headlines in the morning online to witness at least one abuse of power. Um, and then on top of that, we've been conditioned to believe that power is a bad thing, with quotes like "power corrupts," and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Absolutely.
And what good person, what good soul wants to be corrupted? But what they didn't tell us, Pat, is that Lord Acton, who spoke those words, was speaking specifically about political power, not the personal power that you and I are talking about here. And so then what happens too when you add to that is that we haven't been taught emotional intelligence, right? And particularly as men, right? And the conditioning starts at a very young age. Little
Hmm.
boys don't cry, and how twisted that is, and how um, just it doesn't understand what the emotions are. I mean, because first of all, if you want to talk strength and weakness, with power and courage, let's talk about the power of creation that resides in the female body. But somewhere along the way, we turned the feminine into weakness, and so then anything that's max of that, um, it's something to be conquered and controlled. Um, but the emotions, we can't really control them, right? We can master them, and we can bring choice into them, rather than just going around like a 2-year-old having a total meltdown all the time, a total continuous ongoing tantrum. So it's finding that balance, which I think connects to the warrior, because to me, to feel, to be willing to feel, to go inside and to feel and figure out what's going on with us, that's heroic work. It
Hmm.
takes work to figure that out. Um, and much less than to express them in a way that's not pointing the finger, that's not blaming, that's not shirking the responsibility for our emotions, because our emotions are ours, right? That to me, that's the first step. Nobody can make us feel anything. That's that's heroic too. Like, it's so easy to say, "Oh, you made me feel so angry," or "You made me feel so sad." It's like, wait a minute, the same behavior you and I could have completely different responses to. So why do certain emotions trigger us? Say that you and I have lunch with Joe, how every week, and Joe is inevitably late. So there I am on Tuesday waiting for Joe, is like frustrated, and Joe is so selfish, and I'm so pissed off, and he doesn't care about anybody but himself, and doesn't even value my own time and schedule. And then Joe gets there, and because we hate confrontation, we put on a fake smile, but then those emotions start dripping out to the side of our mouth with sarcastic comments and remarks. Um, like suppressed, those suppressed emotions have to come out one way or the other. Whereas you having lunch with him on Wednesday and Joe is late, and it's like, you're great. I have 20 minutes. Let me return that phone call. Let me catch up with my
Yeah.
email. There's so many ways that we could respond to his lateness. Why does it get my go so much? And so that's part of that heroic work, is like figuring out why we do the things we do. So if in this example, for example, to use it as an example that we can apply to other areas of life, I would pause and say, wait a minute, what am I really feeling? I'm underneath the anger, right? I'm feeling disrespected. I'm feeling not valued. I'm feeling
Mhm.
not taken care of, not accounted for. And those, if I get really honest and look at my life, those feelings are much older than my weekly lunch with Joe. So yes, it's work. It takes work to figure out this stuff, but it is so infinitely worthwhile, like I was saying earlier, because now we can bring a choice to the equation, right? His lateness doesn't have to get to us, and we have a choice. Like if we have the conversation with Joe, and Joe's still showing up late, then we have that's another conversation, right? What we do with that.
Mhm.
Either accept it that he's going to be late, or stop having lunch with him, right? So we always have a choice in the matter.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's fascinating because what you're talking about, so much of what we have been taught and conditioned is there's only when there's chaos in your life, there's obstacles in your life, there's challenges in your life, and maybe even opportunities that um, either you freeze, you run, or you fight.
fight,
And
flight, or freeze, yeah,
yeah, and that those are emotion driven responses when in reality, there's a fourth option, and that is to intentionally, like you say, hey, he's 20 minutes late. I intentionally go, okay, I don't want to fight. I my initial road rage, my initial reaction is, the one finger wave or lay on the horn or whatever, because that's emotion driven. How dare you cut me off,
right.
type deal. Uh, to intentionally, what's the right thing to do? At the
Yeah,
the right and make that intentional, and you train yourself to do that so that when somebody does cut you off, and this is hard for me, but I've been working on it. Somebody cuts me off on the highway because I like I-25 through Colorado. You've been on it. It's like
yeah,
only morons, people shouldn't have driver's license are out there. And yeah, I just want to lay on the horn. And I, I literally, I tried to tell myself, maybe they're having a bad day, and I just let off the gas and drop back a little bit, and then boom,
exactly.
my blood pressure doesn't go up, my day's not ruined, all that kind of
Right.
stuff. And uh, but
Because
that
the jerk who cut us off is either enjoying that he cut us off, or
that's
he's more than likely completely clueless, didn't even
yeah,
notice.
yeah,
So they're not having a biological response, physiological response. It's our bio that's eating up our stomach and our digestive system from the inside out.
yeah. I went through that for 5 years. I had somebody at work that came. I'm not going to go into the story, but I was so angry at this person, even though I was ultimately a year and a half later exonerated of all the bull crap. I mean, I got specs and charges against me administratively. They were trying to fire me, and I eventually prevailed, and I was exonerated. And I was so mad at that person for the next 5 years until they retired, uh, that I had panic attacks. Yeah, I just wanted to spit on the ground at the mention of their name. You know, if if they pass away before I do, I'm going to drink a whole bunch of beer and find their grave and relieve myself on their on their grave, kind of deal. Until I had that moment of, and I'm literally that went on for 5 years, and it wasn't consuming me, but it was there. And this person was in a position of authority over me, rank wise. And it wasn't until I came to the realization they don't give a crap how mad I am at them. And I need to, one, forgive them. I'm not going to forget what they did. It's not possible, but I'm going to forgive them and unload that burden on from my shoulders. And it literally felt like a weight coming off. And it's like, shit, I don't have to be pissed all the time.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know, kind of
yeah,
deal. And that takes intention. It takes community. I didn't reach that based on a light bulb moment. It was study, it was prayer, it was, I started surrounding myself with people that had the same visions and missions, statements that I had, and just tried to ignore the toxicity. That forgiveness was the final element.
yeah. And now you're talking about the second of the three things that I don't see a way around, right?
Yeah.
If you want to be free, if you want to be in your power, you've got to forgive, because as long as we're holding whatever they did or failed to do over the fire, our hands also in the fire getting burnt. So we know, we've been told this in different ways, that forgiveness is really for us. And talk about heroism, right? Because sometimes we got to forgive what feels unforgivable.
Hmm.
How do we do that? And here's one way that I came up with that makes it doable, at least. So forgive, flip the syllables around, give for, right? What we're doing when we forgive is we're giving the other human, and sometimes ourselves, which is even more difficult to forgive, the room to be human, to make mistakes, to fall short of the mark, to be less than perfect, right? Because the ego is driven by this impossible standards and perfectionism, which is really overcompensating for not feeling good enough, right? Whoever's got whichever of us has that element of perfectionism, which I think we all have different layers of, it's overcompensating for not feeling good enough. So we'll go out of our way to prove to the world and to ourselves that we are worthy, that we are lovable. Whereas the ridiculous part of that is that worth is inherent and lovability is inherent. There's nothing we need to do to ever prove that.
Hmm.
And yet it's been so conditioned into us that it's something that we got to continue proving. And it's tragic
Hmm.
how we do that.
So what's the third? We hit on the first two. What's the third one?
The third one is probably the hardest, which
Oh,
is
wow. That's I don't know why I want to hear this. The first two sound pretty hard on their own. Oh,
yeah,
so go ahead. What's
and
the third
nothing
one?
less than heroic, to go use that word again.
Yeah.
The third one is tearing up the victim card, right? So letting go of the poor me, woe is me. If only mom had been this way, or daddy hadn't left, or if only the system or the teacher hadn't done that, or if only there wasn't misogyny or homophobia or racism, which they're all real things. I'm not minimizing any of that stuff. But as long as we're giving our power away to any of those people or situations or circumstances, we're giving our power away. Um, and so it's hard because we're basically saying, like, no matter what happened in the past and no matter what happens going forward, we get to choose how we show up in response. And when we reframe it in that way, it makes it a little bit more doable. But
Hmm.
it's ultimately taking responsibility for all aspects of our lives. And yeah, of course, things happen to us that should have never happened to us, and we can't change that. But what we
Yeah.
can change is how we show up in response. That we always have a choice about, and that is stepping into our power.
Wow. Okay. Irish setter squirrel. As you're telling that story, I'm literally flashing back to, and this is 40 years ago. And we had a neighbor whose daughter broke her leg. And I don't remember the circumstances of how she tripped or whatever, but she broke her leg, and she was like 7, 8 years old, and she was in a cast. And here's the analogy I see of what you're saying about being in control of our response despite what happened to us, the rightness, the wrongness, whatever. That's you don't have control over what happens to you, but you do have control over what happens in you, kind of
Yes,
thing,
always,
and your response.
always.
And the analogy I'm thinking of is she had this walking cast on for eight weeks, and they took the cast off. 5 weeks later, she's still walking like she has the cast on. And, and she had just conditioned herself. Well, this is my new walk. I just have to accept it type deal.
Yeah.
When in reality that was a lie. And there were things she could do to intentionally, and she did eventually, but it was, my wife was the one that pointed out because she was looking out the kitchen window and I can't remember the little girl's name now, but is she goes, she's still walking like she has the cast on, and I hadn't even really noted. I wasn't that observant, but
Yeah.
she was, because our kids and her brother, they were our next door neighbors, so our kids played together. But I see that analogy of what you're talking about is at some point you have to break free of
Yeah.
that conditioning that you're using as an excuse or a justification.
Yeah.
Uh, man, I'm telling you what, and when that happens, that sense of peace you talked about earlier in the show, I can speak from personal experience, and some things that were very, very traumatic in our lives. The death of our youngest son serving overseas.
Hmm.
It wasn't until, and we went through a 12-week course on harvesting our tears. How do
Hmm.
you how do you get through something like that? Well, when you still have emotional reactions and that kind of stuff. You don't forget, but you break free of using that circumstance, seeing it as punishment or unexplainable, or you play the what if game. Well, what if
Right.
this? What if that?
Right.
And all those things are out of your control,
That's it.
and none of them are solutions. So I love what you say about that being the third step after you get through the first two.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
Oh, man, it's a
sometimes impossibly difficult to do, almost impossibly difficult, but there's no way around it.
yeah,
And and that's what I mean about living heroically, right? So
yeah,
reacting and hitting somebody back because they hit us, metaphorically, um, anybody can do that. To feel that ouch, um, and go into it and not deny because we don't want to like spiritually bypass our emotions. Of course, we don't want to do that. Um, but to feel it and then to bring the element of choice and just ask, like, how do I want to show up in this situation in a way that's going to get us this boring, repetitive merry-go-round? They say this, I say that. We've done it 1,000 times. Get into the same boring old argument, sometimes just with a different actor. At some point, we're the only ones that can get ourselves out of that.
yeah.
And again, it
That's
begins with self-awareness, which leads to self-acceptance, which opens the door to self-love. And then once
wow.
we get to that place of self-love, it's like all these things, we talk about like having healthy boundaries. It's that stuff kind of becomes natural. Like, of course, like we're not gonna do anything that dishonors ourselves or dishonors anybody else. Um,
Yeah. Ah,
yeah.
man. I think of Mother, now Saint Teresa of Calcutta comes to
Mhm.
mind, of that
Yeah.
kind of mindset of not being consumed with your circumstances, but being, um, that servant leader, that warrior standing up and defending what you believe. And everybody else can have their opinions and whatnot. And I still remember the day that she stood at the podium at the United Nations, this little itty bitty thing, who very politely kind of, backhands all the members of the United Nations in not having the vision of poverty and the serving the least, the last, and the lost in this world, and very politely told them, "Get your head out of your ass,"
Yeah.
type deal, and
Great,
she did
great
it in a
example.
very peaceful way.
Yeah,
So
great
that's
example of
yeah,
both the warrior, servant, leader, and a great example of soulful power, right? Which
yeah,
is which
absolutely,
there's a way that we can step into power in a way that doesn't we don't have to put anybody down. We don't have to step on anybody, put our knee to their neck. Um, we can, that's one of the things that we begin to realize about
and you
soulful
don't
power.
have to, and you don't have to. If you study her, she had
Mhm.
incredible doubts
Yeah.
about herself, but she had a very small core group of 3 to 5 people that kept her uplifted, kept her focused, prayed for her, those kinds of things. And that just because you go through these 3 steps, that doesn't mean you're not going to have challenges and obstacles, or, oh, hey, now I can, it's kind of like you retire from a job and you go, oh, good, I finally arrived. Now I can relax. No, that life's not going to be like that.
Yeah.
But the impact you're going to have if you are in that soulful, soul power, warrior, servant, leader mindset, um, frame of mind, is your life is going to be much more impactful, and you'll be fulfilling your purpose in life.
Exactly. And there's nothing else that's gonna fulfill us.
Yeah.
Anybody who's stuck out this conversation this far, and knows that there isn't anybody out there who's gonna make us happy, and it's not their job to. Like, how unfair to put that responsibility on someone else. "You are gonna make me happy." It's like, yikes. Um, so to approach a relationships consciously, just to squeeze that in before we end our
Yeah.
conversation, means that we approach the relationship with full responsibility for our happiness. We don't expect anyone to make us happy, and it's heroic and it's very empowering. That's what allows
Yeah.
us to be the eye of the storm in life.
Yeah. And the flip side of it is, if I don't have to depend on other people to be happy, which is, by the way, an emotion, in my book, the flip side of it is I can't blame you for making me angry.
Exactly.
That personal responsibility, and that it radically changes your worldview, and
Everything.
it makes you a person that other people want to be around, and to follow you, to be inspired by you, if in a certain fashion, inspiration, again, all those are your own responsibility. But I will mimic good behavior, or I'll mimic bad behavior, kind of deal. That's what our kids do.
Mhm.
We tell parents, look at your kids' 5 closest friends. If they're hellions, your kid's going to be a hellion, because it's easier to be a follower and follow the crowd than it is to be unique and stand up for what is the right thing to do. Man, Christian, what that incredible conversation, and we're gonna have to get you back on. You got another book coming out. I mean, it's we time getting you back on the show and talk about a new book.
Yeah, we hardly even spoke about relationships. I've got the third book of the series is about purpose, but I haven't started. I mean, I've been researching. I've been doing retreats on that theme for many years, but I haven't like started to put the thoughts on down on the page.
Well, get on that.
Yeah,
Uh,
so the first book is on power, then the second one on love, the third one on purpose.
okay, and what's the best way for people to find these books, or to reach out to you? You put on retreats. They go, hey, I want to be a part of one of Christian's retreats, and learn and grow in this mindset. How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, best way is probably my website, Pat, and that's soulfulpower.com, soulfulpower.com, and from there they can email me directly or they can access my social media. And thank you for that question. Thanks for having me on the show, and thanks for having the show, because I know that in your willingness to do that, Pat, many lives are being touched and impacted.
Well, thank you so much, and to our audience, man, thank you for following us, sharing, commenting. I checked on it this morning. We're now in 54 countries on 6
Wow.
continents, all because of your loyalty and you sharing the message with others that need to hear it. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and follow us on YouTube. Warrior Servant Leader Podcast is the handle on YouTube. Follow our website, Warrior Servant Leader podcast.com, on LinkedIn, Instagram, at Pat Welsh, JD, and somebody asked me, why'd you put JD behind your name? I go, because there's a famous gardener, female gardener in California, and her name is Pat Welsh. I don't want you to go looking at her books. So, my handle on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Substack is at Pat Welsh JD. Check out our books, 2 books on Amazon: Warrior Servant Leader, Life Behind the Badge; Warrior Servant Leader, Life Behind the Cross. And always, always, as we end every show, the thing that every warrior servant leader does every day, every time, is to strive to do the right thing at the right time, the right way, and for the right reasons. Love you all, and see you next week.